The chair splintered before I even realized I had lost my grip. A sharp crack cut through the humid air as one of its legs gave way, sending me stumbling backward, barely managing to catch myself before crashing into the flower bed. Dirt clung to my hands, and frustration tightened in my chest. "Damn thing," I muttered, shaking soil from my jeans. "Need a hand." The voice came from behind me, deep and smooth, laced with amusement. I spun around, my heart skipping a beat, and there he was, Liam. He leaned casually against the porch railing, arms crossed over his chest, watching me with a faint smirk. His blonde hair, messy and sun-kissed, looked as if he hadn't run a comb through it in days. His green eyes, sharp and assessing, held a quiet intensity one wasn't prepared for. I swallowed hard. "I've got it," I said quickly, bending to pick up the broken chair. But he didn't move away. Instead, he pushed off the railing and sauntered forward, crouching beside me. "Doesn't look like it." He ran a hand over the splintered wood. "That's beyond repair. You got tools?" I hesitated. I had tools somewhere. The thought of leading him into the basement, the space still cluttered with Michael's old things, sent an uneasy ripple through me. "I can handle it," I said, forcing a smile. Liam tilted his head slightly, his smirk softening into something gentler. "Mary," he said, and my breath hitched at how effortlessly he said my name. "Let me help." It had been a long time since someone had spoken to me like that, with care, with a quiet insistence that I mattered. Before I could think of a reason to refuse, I found myself nodding. "Fine," I said, sighing. "Follow me." The basement smelled of dust and old wood. The single light bulb overhead flickered as I pulled the chain, casting long shadows against the cement walls. I hadn't set foot in here much since Michael passed, not because I wasn't capable, but because sorting through a dead man's things felt too much like a confession that he was truly gone. Liam let out a low whistle as he glanced around. "This place has history." "It has clutter," I corrected, wiping a layer of dust off an old workbench. He moved easily through the space, fingers trailing over long-forgotten tools before plucking a rusted screwdriver from a shelf. "Michael's?" he asked. I nodded stiffly. He liked to fix things. Liam studied me for a beat before crouching to retrieve an old toolbox. "And you don't?" I hesitated before answering. I never had to. His gaze flickered with something unreadable, but he didn't press. Instead, he popped open the toolbox, rolling his shoulders like he was settling into something familiar. "Well, today's a good day to learn." We worked in silence, the only sounds the occasional creak of the house settling above us and the soft scrape of metal against wood. Liam moved with quiet confidence, tightening screws and reinforcing weak joints with practiced ease. His hands, steady and strong, made quick work of the damage. "You've done this before," I noted, watching as he secured the last screw. A flicker of something crossed his face, something shadowed, distant. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "My dad used to make me fix everything that broke in our house. Said it was a skill I'd thank him for one day." I considered that as I wiped my hands on my jeans. "Did you?" Liam's lips quirked into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Guess we'll find out." The chair, once broken, now stood as solid as it had in its prime. I ran my fingers over the smooth wood, marveling at how effortlessly he had pieced it back together. "Thank you," I murmured. Liam stood, brushing sawdust from his shorts. "No problem." But he didn't move right away. Instead, he leaned against the workbench, watching me with that same unreadable expression. "You've been alone a long time, haven't you?" The question made my stomach tighten. "It's been 2 years." 2 years is a long time," he said quietly. I swallowed hard, suddenly feeling exposed. Michael wasn't around much toward the end. His job, it always came first. Liam nodded, something flickering behind his eyes. "Yeah, I know the type." Silence settled between us, thick and charged. I shifted, suddenly needing to escape the weight of it. "Dinner's in an hour," I said quickly. You're welcome to join. For a moment, I thought he'd refuse. But then, slowly, he nodded. I'd like that. And just like that, something shifted, something small but undeniable. As I followed him up the stairs, I felt it in my bones. Liam wasn't just passing through. He was here to stay. The evening air was thick with the scent of fresh basil and simmering tomatoes as I stirred the pot of sauce. The kitchen was quiet except for the rhythmic bubbling of the stovetop and the occasional creak of the old floorboards beneath my feet. Liam sat at the table, one hand wrapped around a glass of iced tea, the other drumming absent-mindedly against the wooden surface. I could feel his gaze on me, steady and unrelenting, even as I kept my back turned. "You always cook this much?" he asked, breaking the silence. I glanced over my shoulder, offering a small smile. Force of habit. When Michael was alive, we always had guests over. I guess I never learned how to cook for just one. Liam nodded, his expression thoughtful. Guess that makes two of us. My mom used to cook enough to feed an army, said it was her way of keeping the house full, even when it wasn't. Something about the way he said it, soft, distant, made my chest tighten. Did it work? I asked gently. He smirked, but there was no humor in it. For a while. I didn't push. We all had ghosts we weren't ready to name. Instead, I reached for 2 plates, setting them down on the table before sliding into the chair across from him. We ate in easy silence, the clink of silverware against porcelain the only sound between us. I stole glances at him when I thought he wouldn't notice, but Liam was sharp. He noticed everything. "This is good," he finally said, spearing a roasted tomato with his fork. "Thank you." "You miss it?" I blinked. "Miss what?" "The company." I hesitated, my grip tightening around my glass. "I used to," I admitted. "But over time, you get used to the quiet." Liam studied me for a long moment before setting his fork down. "Maybe you shouldn't have to." His words sent a ripple through me, an uncomfortable mix of warmth and warning. I reached for my glass, trying to ignore the way my pulse quickened. "What about you? What are you running from?" He let out a soft chuckle, leaning back in his chair. "Who says I'm running?" I raised an eyebrow. A 27-year-old who suddenly shows up at his grandfather's old house and offers to fix things without being asked? That's not running. Liam's smirk faltered just slightly, his fingers tightening around the rim of his glass. "Maybe," he admitted. "Or maybe I just wanted a change." A change. Something in my stomach twisted, and I looked away. Because maybe I did, too. After dinner, I climbed into the attic, the scent of dust and old wood thick in the air. I hadn't been up here in years, and it showed. Boxes stacked high, forgotten remnants of a life I had packed away but never truly let go of. I reached for one labeled photos, dragging it closer to the dim light spilling from the tiny window. As I lifted the lid, my breath caught. Faded photographs, their edges curled with time, stared back at me. A younger version of myself, laughing on a beach. Michael, standing beside me, his arm draped loosely around my shoulders. The woman in the picture looked so different from the one I saw in the mirror every morning. Carefree. Unburdened. "You look happy." I startled, nearly knocking the box over. Liam stood in the doorway, his shirt rumpled, his hair slightly damp from the summer heat. I admitted, turning the photo over in my hands. "Feels like a lifetime ago." He stepped closer, crouching beside me. "It doesn't seem that long." I let out a breathless laugh. "To you, maybe." Liam reached for another photograph, holding it up to the dim light. "You're still beautiful." The words settled between us, heavier than they should have been. I swallowed hard, setting the photo back in the box. "That was a long time ago," I murmured, my voice betraying the tremor in my chest. "Some things don't change," he said softly. I looked up then, meeting his gaze in the hazy attic light. There was something raw in his expression, something unspoken but undeniably there. The space between us felt smaller. Charged. I should have stood up. I should have said something to break the moment. But I didn't. And neither did he. It started with the smallest of touches. A hand grazing mine as we reached for the same book. A lingering glance over dinner. The tension that neither of us acknowledged, but both of us felt. Then came the storm. Rain hammered against the roof as I reached for the last cushion outside, the wind whipping through my hair as I struggled against the elements. "Mary, leave it." Liam's voice cut through the downpour, but I was already slipping, my foot catching on the slick patio floor, my body lurching sideways. I barely had time to brace myself before strong arms caught me, pulling me upright. "Jesus," Liam muttered, his hands firm on my waist. "You okay?" I nodded, breathless, water dripping from my hair onto my shoulders.
"Ivy fine."
But I wasn't, because his hands were still on me, because his face was too close, because my heart was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with the fall. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the sharp lines of his face, the droplets clinging to his jawline. His gaze flickered to my lips, just for a second, but it was enough. Enough to send my stomach plummeting. Enough to make my fingers tighten around his shirt. Enough to make me forget every reason why this was a terrible idea. Then his lips were on mine.
Soft. Tentative.
A slow, searching kiss that stole the breath from my lungs. I didn't stop him. I let it happen. And the worst part? I wanted it to. The moment our lips parted, reality came crashing down like a wave, drowning out the warmth that had settled in my chest. I took a shaky step back, my breath unsteady, my heart pounding against my ribs like a warning drum. "Liam," I whispered, barely able to say his name without feeling the weight of what we'd just done. He didn't look away. His green eyes stayed locked on mine, searching, waiting. "Say it," he murmured. "Say you didn't want that." I opened my mouth, ready to deny it, ready to push him away for good. But the words wouldn't come, because it wasn't true. Instead, I turned on my heel and fled. The rain soaked through my clothes as I hurried inside, my fingers shaking as I gripped the edge of the kitchen sink. I stared at my reflection in the darkened window, my own wide-eyed expression staring back at me like a stranger. What had I done? I avoided him after that. For the next few days, I buried myself in meaningless tasks, sorting through old clothes, scrubbing the kitchen floor twice over, pulling weeds from the garden, even though my hands ached from the effort. Anything to keep busy. Anything to keep from thinking. But I wasn't fooling anyone. Least of all Liam. By the third evening, he'd had enough. "You can't keep pretending I don't exist, Mary." His voice was calm, steady, but there was something in it, an edge of frustration, of something deeper. I forced myself to keep my back turned as I wiped down the counter. "I'm not pretending anything," I lied. Liam scoffed. "Really? Because the last time I checked, we had dinner together every night. Now you barely stay in the same room as me for more than a minute." I swallowed hard, gripping the cloth tighter. "I just think we need some space." "Space," he repeated, his voice quieter now. I dared a glance at him, and the look on his face nearly shattered me. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even disappointed. He just looked resigned, like he already knew how this would end. "I get it," he said after a moment. "You think this is wrong." I didn't answer. Liam exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "But what if it's not?" I turned then, my throat tightening. "Liam." "What if," he continued, stepping closer, his voice low and urgent, "what if we're just two people who understand each other in a way no one else does?" The words sent a shiver down my spine. Because deep down I knew he was right. But that didn't mean we could be. I shook my head, wrapping my arms around myself. "It doesn't matter," I whispered. "People will talk." Liam let out a bitter laugh. "Since when do you care what people think?" That hit harder than it should have. I used to pride myself on my independence, on not giving a damn about town gossip. But this was different. This wasn't just some harmless rumor. This was a line we couldn't uncross. Liam's jaw clenched, his frustration bleeding through. "So that's it?" You'd rather be alone than take a chance on something real? I opened my mouth to argue, but the words tangled in my throat. Because, deep down, I wasn't sure if he was wrong.
And that terrified me.
By the time the sun began to set, I found myself at the back of the property, where the old wooden fence stretched into the distance. The same fence Liam had helped me fix just weeks ago, back when things were simple. I traced a hand over the rough wood, my chest tight with something I couldn't name. Thinking of running? I stiffened at the sound of his voice, but I didn't turn around. No, I said softly. Liam stepped beside me, his hands in his pockets. Could have fooled me. A tense silence stretched between us, the kind that felt like a knife's edge, sharp and dangerous. Then finally he spoke again. I meant what I said, Mary. His voice was softer now, but no less intense. I don't care what people think. I don't care if it doesn't make sense to anyone else. I care about you. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the fence tighter. Liam. I care about you, he repeated, firmer this time. And I know you care about me too. The words sliced through my carefully built walls like a blade. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to turn and walk away. But when I finally faced him, all I could do was whisper, "It doesn't change anything." Liam's expression darkened. Doesn't it? I sucked in a shaky breath. You're 27. And you're 54, he shot back without hesitation. So what? So people will never understand. Then let them not understand. His voice was rough with frustration, with something almost like desperation. I don't want to spend my life making safe choices, Mary. I want to live. And I want. He stopped himself, running a hand over his face before shaking his head. I felt the loss of whatever he hadn't said like a physical blow. You want what? I whispered. Liam let out a slow, unsteady breath.
You.
The word lingered between us, heavy and undeniable. I should have pushed him away. I should have told him that this was madness, that it would never work. But instead, I just stood there, staring at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. And for the first time in years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. I felt alive. The words hung between us, thick and inescapable.
You.
Liam wasn't asking. He wasn't uncertain. He had laid it all out, raw and undeniable, and now it was my turn to decide. I should have walked away. I should have shut this down for good. Instead, I whispered, Liam, we can't. He let out a quiet, bitter laugh. Then why are you still here? I didn't have an answer. Because the truth was, every time I told myself to push him away, something stronger pulled me back. Him. The way he looked at me like I was someone, not just a woman past her prime, not just a widow fading into the background, but someone worth wanting. The way his presence filled the house in a way it hadn't felt in years. The way my pulse reacted every damn time he got too close. And worst of all, the way I liked it. I don't remember who moved first. Maybe it was him. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was inevitable. All I knew was that 1 second we were standing by that old fence, and the next his hands were on me, firm but careful, hesitant but insistent. And God help me, I let him. His lips brushed mine once. Just once. Soft and slow, like he was giving me every chance to stop him. But I didn't. And when I didn't, he kissed me again. Deeper this time. Hungrier. I gasped against his mouth, my fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt, anchoring myself to something, anything, as the world tilted beneath me. I should have pulled away. I should have reminded myself, of all the reasons why this was wrong. But all I could think about was how warm his skin was beneath my fingertips, how solid he felt, how right this felt when nothing else had in years. The fence pressed against my back as his hands skimmed up my arms, over my shoulders, settling at my waist like he was afraid to push too far. Tell me to stop, he murmured, his breath warm against my lips. And I will. I opened my mouth, ready to say the words. But nothing came out, because I didn't want him to stop. And the second he realized it, the restraint in his touch shattered. His mouth was on mine again, fiercer now, desperate, and I met him with just as much urgency, years of loneliness unraveling in a single moment. We weren't just crossing a line. We were obliterating it. The weight of it all. Later, long after the storm had passed and the air had settled into a thick, humid quiet, I sat on the edge of my bed, my pulse still racing. I could still feel him.
His hands on me.
His lips against my skin. The way he had whispered my name like it was something sacred. And I knew that I had just made everything 1,000 times more complicated. I buried my face in my hands, my chest tight. This couldn't happen again. It wouldn't happen again. I had to end this before it destroyed us both. The next morning, I did what I did best. I shut him out. I moved through the house like a ghost, avoiding his gaze, keeping my distance, throwing up walls as fast as I could build them. But Liam was nothing if not persistent. By the time evening rolled around, I found him waiting for me in the kitchen, arms crossed over his chest. "We need to talk," he said. I busied myself with the dishes, keeping my back turned. "There's nothing to talk about." "Really?" His voice was calm, but there was something dangerous beneath it. Because last night sure as hell felt like something. I gripped the edge of the sink. It was a mistake. Silence. The kind that made my stomach clench. When I finally turned around, his jaw was tight, his green eyes dark with something I couldn't quite place. "A mistake," he echoed. I nodded, forcing myself to hold his gaze. "It can't happen again." His lips pressed into a thin line, and for a second, I thought he might argue. But then, slowly, he exhaled and took a step back.
"Fine."
I swallowed past the lump in my throat.
"Fine."
Then he turned and walked away. And for some reason, watching him go felt like the worst mistake of all. I told myself it was for the best. That keeping my distance was the right thing, the only thing. But the house felt different now. Every room carried the weight of what had happened. Every glance, every accidental brush of skin, every breathless second when we had let ourselves forget the rules.
"And Liam?"
He didn't push. Didn't try to talk about it again. But that didn't mean he let it go. Instead, he stayed, fixing things around the house, sitting at the table during dinner, filling the empty spaces with his quiet presence until I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of everything I wasn't saying. I had spent years mastering the art of loneliness, but now I wasn't sure I could survive it again. Days passed in a slow, aching blur. I kept my hands busy, scrubbing floors that didn't need cleaning, rearranging bookshelves I hadn't touched in years, forcing myself into a routine that had once felt normal. But nothing about this felt normal, especially not the way my heart kicked against my ribs every time Liam was near. One evening, I found him outside by the fence, hammer in hand, fixing a section that had started to lean. The sunset cast long shadows across his face, the golden light catching in his hair. He looked at home, and that scared me more than anything. "You don't have to keep fixing things," I said, crossing my arms as I leaned against the porch railing. Liam didn't look up. "Maybe I want to." I sighed. "Liam, you don't have to say it." He drove a nail into the wood with one sharp movement. "I already know what you're going to say." "Do you?" He finally looked at me then, his expression unreadable. "Yeah." I swallowed hard. "Then you know why this has to stop." His jaw clenched.
"No."
"What I know is that you're scared." My breath hitched. "I know you feel this too," he continued, stepping closer, his voice steady but quiet. "And I know you're pushing me away, because it's easier than facing it." I shook my head, willing myself to stay firm. "It's not that simple." "It is," he said. "It's the simplest thing in the world." I forced a laugh, but it came out hollow. "You're young, Liam. You have your whole life ahead of you. You don't need to waste your time here." His expression darkened. "Is that what you think this is?" I turned away, gripping the railing so hard my knuckles turned white. "I think you'll wake up one day and regret this." Liam let out a slow, shaky breath. "The only thing I regret," he murmured, "is not kissing you sooner." I closed my eyes, the words hitting harder than I wanted to admit. I had to end this, before it was too late. I did something reckless that night. Something desperate. I packed his bags, folded his clothes, left them by the door. And when morning came, I found him standing in the hallway, staring at them. His back was rigid, his fists clenched at his sides. When he finally turned to face me, his expression was unreadable. "You're serious," he said, his voice flat. I nodded, my throat so tight I could barely breathe. "It's time, Liam." He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "That's it." I forced myself to meet his eyes. Yes. Silence. A long, unbearable silence. Then he let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "You really think this is going to fix things?" I swallowed. "I think it's the only choice." His gaze burned into me. "For who?" I didn't answer, because we both knew the truth. This wasn't about what was right. It was about what was safe. Liam let out another breath, shaking his head. "You know what, Mary?" His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "I thought you were different." The words sliced through me like a blade. But I didn't let it show. Instead, I stood there unflinching as he grabbed his bag, slung it over his shoulder, and walked out the door. And as the sound of his footsteps faded down the gravel path, something inside me shattered. I had gotten what I wanted. So why did it feel like I had just lost everything? The house was too quiet after Liam left. Not just quiet in the way an empty house always is, but wrong. Like the walls knew something had changed, like the very air had shifted. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, my footsteps echoing where they never had before. The table felt bigger, the living room colder, the spaces where he had been now feeling like voids I couldn't ignore. I told myself I had done the right thing, that it would be easier this way. But that didn't explain why my hands still shook when I reached for the coffee pot in the morning, why I still turned expecting to see him sitting on the porch, watching the sun rise. Why every time the wind blew through the trees, I swore I could hear his voice. I should have been relieved. Instead, I was unraveling. 2 days passed, then 3. By the 4th, the whispers started. I felt them before I heard them. The lingering glances at the grocery store, the way Mrs. Johnson's voice dropped when I passed her house, the sudden hush at the post office when I stepped inside. It was subtle, careful, but it was there. And I knew exactly what they were whispering about. Liam and I had been careful, so careful. But in a town like this, eyes were everywhere. People had seen the way he looked at me, the way I had started looking back. The weight of it pressed down on me, tightening around my ribs like a vice. I needed to move on, to pretend it hadn't happened. But pretending didn't stop the ache. It didn't stop me from dreaming about him, from waking up breathless, reaching for someone who was no longer there. Unfinished business. I told myself I wouldn't go looking for him, that if he had truly left, I needed to let him. But on the 5th night, when the loneliness became unbearable, I found myself standing at his grandfather's old house, staring up at the darkened windows. It was empty. Dust settled on the porch. The mailbox overflowed with unopened letters. He was really gone. I gripped the railing, my stomach twisting. This is what you wanted, I reminded myself. Then, why did it feel like I had made a terrible mistake? The next day, I heard his name at the market. He left town in a hurry, someone whispered near the produce aisle. Didn't even say goodbye. I heard he and Mary got close. I froze, my fingers tightening around the basket handle. She's too old for that kind of nonsense, another voice murmured. My stomach clenched. I knew this town. Knew how its people thrived on gossip, on twisting the truth into something uglier. But what I hadn't expected, what I hadn't prepared for, was the sharp sting of shame curling in my chest. Like I had done something wrong. Like loving him, because wasn't that what this had been, was something to be embarrassed about. I dropped the basket and walked out, the weight of their stares pressing into my back. That night, As I stood on the porch, the sky thick with the promise of rain, the phone rang. I hesitated before answering. Mary. His voice sent a shiver through me. I gripped the phone tighter. Liam. A beat of silence. Then, I shouldn't have left. My chest tightened. You didn't have a choice. I did.
His voice was quieter now.
And I made the wrong one. I closed my eyes, the wind whipping through the trees, carrying his words through the static. I don't care what people say, he continued. I don't care about this town. I only care about you. My breath hitched. Liam, tell me to come back, he murmured. And I will. The words hit me like a punch to the ribs, because I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell him to come home, to forget the whispers, to let this be what it was meant to be. But fear had its claws in me, and I wasn't sure I knew how to let go. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. Tell me to come back, Liam had said, his voice raw, waiting, hoping. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But the weight of reality pressed down on me, the echoes of whispered voices and judgmental stares winding around my ribs like a vice. I forced myself to breathe. Liam, I don't know if I can. Silence. Then a quiet exhale on the other end. You can, Mary. You just won't. I closed my eyes, my pulse pounding. It's not that simple. His voice hardened. Yes, it is. No, it's not. I snapped, my grip tightening on the receiver. You don't understand what this will do to me, to us. I understand just fine, he said, his voice quieter now. You're scared. I turned away from the wind rattling the windows, pressing my forehead against the cool wall. Of course I'm scared. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then, softer, more careful. Mary, what do you want? My breath caught. Because that was the real question, wasn't it? Not what's right. Not what will people think. But what I wanted. I wanted Liam. I wanted the way he made me feel, seen, alive. I wanted to stop caring about the town, the whispers, the years between us. I don't know, I whispered. And that was the truth. Liam sighed, and when he spoke again, his voice was different. Resigned. I can't be the only one fighting for this, Mary. My throat tightened. I know. I won't wait forever, he added, his voice gentle but firm. I can't. Tears burned at the edges of my eyes. I swallowed hard. Goodbye, Liam. A long, heavy silence. Then, just before the line went dead. Goodbye, Mary. And just like that, he was gone. The next morning, I went into town as if nothing had changed. But everything had. The whispers felt sharper. The glances lingered longer. Even the cashier at the grocery store hesitated before handing me my receipt, her smile tight, her curiosity barely concealed. I could feel the judgment in the air. And for the first time I realized it would never matter if Liam was here or not. The town had already decided its version of the story. I had already been seen. Already been talked about. Already been branded. So what the hell was I still running from? By the time I got home, the house felt suffocating. Liam's absence was a wound that refused to close. His laughter was missing from the walls, his presence missing from every room he used to fill. And for what? Because of fear? Because I had spent too many years doing what was expected of me instead of what I wanted? My hands trembled as I picked up the phone. I dialed before I could talk myself out of it. It rang once.
Twice.
Then, the number you have dialed is no longer in service. I pulled the receiver away, staring at it like I could will the message to change. I dialed again. Same result. My stomach dropped. Liam was gone. Not just from town, but gone. And I had waited too long. The hollow ring of the disconnected line echoed in my ears long after I set the phone down. Liam was gone. I had pushed him away, convinced myself it was for the best, and now, I was realizing the weight of what I had done. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, my breath coming in short, uneven bursts. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? A quiet life.
Stability.
The comfort of routine, untouched by scandal or reckless choices. Then, why did it feel like the walls were closing in? Why did the house feel so empty? I turned abruptly, my hands shaking as I moved through the house, desperate to find something, anything, that would ground me. But everywhere I looked, I saw him. The chair he had fixed. The old record player he had tinkered with one afternoon, laughing as he tried to get it to work. The spot by the window where he used to sit, watching the sun dip below the trees. I had spent so much time trying to convince myself that he didn't belong here. But the truth was, without him, this place felt like nothing more than a shell. A prison of my own making. I don't know what I was expecting when I opened the door later that afternoon. Maybe nothing. Maybe another ghost of him, lingering in the air. But instead, I found an envelope on the porch. My name, written in his handwriting. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. For a long moment, I just stood there, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. Then, finally, I opened it. Mary. I wanted to say goodbye in person, but I think we both knew that wouldn't have made a difference. You made your choice. I had to make mine. I won't pretend this doesn't hurt. I won't pretend I don't wish things were different. But I can't stay here, waiting for you to decide you're ready. I hope, one day, you realize what you truly wanted. And I hope, when you do, it's not too late.
Liam.
The paper slipped from my fingers. I gasped, pressing a hand to my mouth as the weight of his words crashed into me. He was really gone. And I had let him go. I sank down onto the porch steps, the warm summer air thick around me, the letter fluttering at my feet.
He had wanted me.
Not the idea of me. Not some fleeting fantasy.
Me.
And I had thrown it away. For what? For the comfort of a life that didn't exist anymore? For the approval of a town that had already cast its judgment? I had thought I was doing the right thing. But as I sat there, staring at the empty road ahead, I realized the truth. The worst kind of regret isn't for something you've done. It's for something you were too afraid to do. And I would carry that regret for the rest of my life.